bringing Iran's oil exports down to zero and cutting it off the global banking system. So it can't be paid or pay for any imports and exports anyway. Those are the highlights of the US's maximum pressure campaign on Iran, which began since the US pullout from the JCPOA or Iran nuclear deal in 2018. It was actually just a last-minute top-up for already existing sanctions and has hardly served as a strategy, although Iran's state of the economy is not looking pretty. Given the current situation, the economy, transparency and taxation are top of the agenda for lawmakers and executors in Iran. Although this country's economy is gasping for air, however, it sees opportunity in the situation, whereas the US's maximum pressure campaign seems to be backfiring on itself. For the how and why of the matter, stay with me, Leila Faramarzi, on Iran Today. The US campaign was to get Iran to yield, to come sit down to talks on a second JCPOA, limiting its missile program and regional policy. But nowhere in sight is there a sign of talks between the flailing world power to the west and the West Asian heavyweight to the east. Certainly not with the current US president in office. So how successful have American maximum pressure sanctions actually been? Mr. Qadiri Abiane is a political expert who came to our studios. Let's hear him share his ideas.
Trump
has said America first. That is, everything for America. Others would have no right and would have to bow to the US. Ever since taking office, Trump has pursued strange policies. I personally think that the existence of Trump is a divine blessing bestowed upon Iran. Look, Iran has long been trying to wean its economy off oil. Being not dependent on oil does not mean not selling oil. However, oil money dissuaded the Iranian government from taking action to that effect. Trump has imposed sanctions upon us, automatically helping us achieve what we were after.
The 2015 Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action was to limit Iran's nuclear program in return for lifting sanctions off this country. Iran complied. It was the only party to the deal that actively complied, as testified by the UN nuclear watchdog, the Vienna-based IAEA. So US President Trump has pushed Iran in the opposite direction to what he intended, while alienating US allies and partners to the nuclear deal. Mr. Yazdan Panoh is a professor we call up every so often for a geostrategic look at political affairs. Here's what he has to say. Would you say the US's maximum pressure campaign against Iran has seriously backfired? Not just looking at Iran's leaning towards China, but looking at its greater eagerness to speed up its nuclear program, to pursue its missile program, etc.
تصور ترامپ این بود که با فشار گذاشتن روی گلوی ایران
Trump imagined that by ratcheting up the pressure on Iran, closing all international borders and toughening sanctions, he would be able to bring Iran to its knees earlier than thought so that Iran would be brought to the negotiating table as they wanted. That has not happened up to now, and Trump's term in office is ending. Trump is likely to lose the next election, however it could not be said with certainty. But the dominant atmosphere in the US indicates his possible defeat. Under Trump, Iran has not buckled down under pressure. While sparing the country any harm, collapse and foreign intervention, the Islamic Republic decided to resume nuclear activities it had frozen under the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action or the JCPOA.
For scientific use in medicine and power generation, Iran has sped up its nuclear program, is more determined than ever about its deterrent ballistic missile program, and is out to strike a phenomenal deal with China, the US's up-and-coming nightmare rival.
اگر غربی‌ها
Had the Western governments behaved differently, we would be still willing to have economic ties with them. Even by that time, we were seeking ties with Russia, China, and other nations. The West might have closed its doors to us, but the East has kept its doors open. We are not supposed to bow to dominance. We are not supposed to depend on China or any other power. We are already a regional and extra-regional power. Each country seeks its own interests, and we are after our own. In the same manner, China is after its own. Wherever such interests interface, an agreement is struck.
اگر ما این رو گره بزنیم به اینکه چون با آمریکا به نتیجه نرسید.
It would be wrong to say that we are turning to China because we have reached nowhere with the US. It would be interpreted as if Iran chose to work with China from a position of weakness and out of fear for the US. Such things should not be insinuated. Nothing extraordinary is to happen. China is said to be investing $400 billion in Iran. If we consider this $400 billion for a 20-year period, it would be $20 billion a year. Iran-China annual trade already totals $40 billion, and therefore $20 billion would be meager.
It would be safe to say the US maximum pressure campaign has backfired, even if it has caused minor discomforts for Iran. Yes, the value of the local currency has taken a pretty plunge, down to 230,000 riyals to the dollar, but the tolerance threshold and survival skills of this nation are phenomenal. And not all plight is owed to US sanctions.
Our national capacities are unique. In the agriculture sector, which we look at for food security, we enjoy highest potential. In economic and social issues, manpower and industrial sector, our capacities are unparalleled. But we have failed to put our potential into practice. On the regional and international scene, when the US president asserts that despite spending $7 trillion, he has achieved nothing against Iran, this shows sacrificial resistance. Definitely, if resistance is coupled with strong management, sanctions will fail.
The nation's threshold for hardship was high, and with decades-long sanctions, it has developed an antibiotic-like resistance to sanctions and their outcomes. Not just that, it has at the same time found ways to circumvent sanctions, such as alternative methods of payment for exports and imports. Informal payment mechanisms, you can call it. By mid-April 2020, the rial had lost half its value in just under 2 years. That loss of value has again doubled since. Oil exports, on the other hand, are down nearly 90% from 2018, and the economy shrank over 7% in 2019. But the Iranians really do have alternative industries to fall back on, and a significant domestic capacity, as well as the ability to leverage their relationships with several of their neighboring states, as quoted by CFR, Council on Foreign Relations, a non-profit US think tank. Never mind modern industry. How would you balance Iran's foreign policy?
با همه این فشارهایی که روی ایران آمد
Despite all the pressure applied on Iran, it maintained its regional policy vis-à-vis its Middle East and Anatolian neighbors with which it has normal ties. Owing to deep-seated ties with neighbors, the country was spared serious economic harm, and the economic collapse the US hoped to happen by 2019 did not happen. What is clear is that the Americans have failed in their pressure campaign to bring Iran to its knees. Therefore, whether Trump is re-elected or his rival Joe Biden wins the presidency, the US is expected to revise its policy vis-à-vis Iran.
Apart from trade with regional Persian Gulf and Caspian states, Iran is looking to the east at large, to countries such as China and Russia and India and North Korea for economic and political cooperation. China's presence as Iran's most important trade and investment partner would grow to fulfill a possible 25-year deal between the two Asian nations. Russia, on the other hand, would provide not economic relief as such to its once neighbor to the south, but political support and military equipment.
مثلا الان چین
China is currently under tough U.S. pressure. Pompeo recently said China would change the U.S. should the U.S. fail to change China. But China is the largest oil importer. Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates and other countries are currently supplying oil to China. But if the U.S. orders a cut to oil supply to China, these suppliers would not stand against the U.S. China is concerned with its own future. China seeks a guaranteed oil flow. The only independent country with no dependence on the U.S. to be able to supply China's oil is Iran. We have always been looking for economic ties.
There's more to be said, but let's take a quick break to give a voice to other media outlets, see what they have to say. For that, I give you Shahrzad.
Hi, I'm Shahrzad Manuchehri, and this is the news section of Iran Today. We'll be looking online for the latest update on U.S. maximum pressure campaign failure and its repercussions. The Washington Post reports our maximum pressure on Iran failed, unless the goal was to help China. The Trump administration's maximum pressure campaign against Iran has manifestly failed to achieve either its stated or unstated aims. It has not forced Iran to renegotiate the nuclear accord from which President Trump unwisely withdrew, nor has it ended Iranian actions in the Middle East or caused the Iranian government to collapse. Now, it may result in a powerful new blow to U.S. interests in the form of an Iranian partnership with China that could rescue Iran's economy while giving Beijing a powerful new place in the region. Yet Mr. Trump's confrontational approach to China in recent months, including his refusal to continue work on a comprehensive trade deal, has given Mr. Xi little incentive to cooperate with Washington's geopolitical priorities. On the contrary, the Chinese leadership likely perceives a moment of critical U.S. weakness as Mr. Trump flounders amid a health and economic crisis and is moving to take advantage. In an article by Foreign Policy, we witnessed the total destruction of U.S. foreign policy under Trump. As the presidential election season heats up, Trump's latest failure should remind American voters that his administration has failed on the most important global threats, not least the COVID-19 pandemic, Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea. All these and other foreign policy failures should be just as much at the center of the debate as the crush of domestic policy concerns. Trump's foreign policy mainly consists of a series of marginally coherent tweets with no discernible objective or strategy. Indeed, after 3.5 years in office, Trump has developed no foreign policy at all. What we do see are haphazard assertions, maximum pressure campaigns, boundless admiration for and obsequious pandering to authoritarian leaders, disparaging of democratic allies, and so-called trade deals that cost thousands of American jobs and lack any strategic objective. Newsweek takes a look into how Iran threatens crushing retaliation as Pompeo louds U.S. pressure campaign. Iran's Islamic Revolution Guard Corps has threatened a crushing response to any perceived U.S. aggression, following the conclusion of large military exercises that prompted a high alert at 2 regional U.S. bases. The IRGC issued a statement claiming to have sent a potent message to the U.S. with the combined armed drills, which include ballistic missile launches and an attack on a mock U.S. aircraft carrier. U.S. troops in Qatar and the United Arab Emirates were temporarily put on high alert during the missile launches. The Islamic Republic of Iran has never started a war, but in case of any aggression against Iran, IRGC and other powerful defenders of the country will give a decisive and crushing response. That's all for this segment. We'll see you next week.
It has been claimed that in combat, Iran would be more vulnerable than its potential target. However, Iran now does have missiles with precision strike capability. In talking to MPs today, among matters, I'm going to be asking what Iran's power source is. Mr. Reza Hosseini has been MP several times round. Here's what he says.
Regarding military, the founder of Islamic Republic Imam Khomeini ordered the formation of a 20 million strong army, which exists nowhere else. We believe that we have manufactured deterrent and defensive weapons domestically to rival their armaments. From time to time, we unveil our long-range missiles and missiles hitting with pinpoint precision. We showed the efficiency of our missiles when we struck the US military base. We are able to send spaceships into space, build warplanes. The enemy is well aware of our capabilities.
Even when meticulously planned, sanctions can well backfire. And Iran has in living memory suffered chemical attacks on its civilians as a result of Western powers ganging up on this country for the 80s war waged on it by Ba'athist Iraq. The JCPOA was the one deal that convinced Iran to lower its defenses. And now the US, after pulling out of the deal, is pressing other parties to the deal to extend the arms embargo on Iran. Of course, seeing the threat, Iran will become all the keener to now advance its defenses and deterrent force.
We didn't have missiles during the Iraqi-imposed war on Iran. Saddam received missiles from everywhere and struck our cities. We couldn't defend ourselves. We want missiles for defense only. Why do they say Iran shouldn't have missiles? Do they plan to attack us? Without any defense power, we would be vulnerable to invasion. We will not allow any war against us. If any war is to break out, we should be able to strike back at invaders. We have currently such capacity. US military research centers have said in their assessments that if the US launches any war on Iran, its entire fleet will be drowned and at least 20,000 Americans will be killed. We don't favor any war. We will do our best to avert a war. But we are powerful and we will add to our strength in defense and deterrence.
Iran's increasingly expanding missile program has yielded developments that could allow it to deliver nuclear warheads anywhere in the region, hit much of Europe, and develop some form of ICBM, or intercontinental ballistic missile. While Iran, an NPT, Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty member, also Islamically prohibits nuclear war power, it has no problem using missiles to defend its territory, even if only by asymmetric warfare. That holds all the more so given the presence of hostile US forces so close to home on the Iraqi border and in the Persian Gulf waters.
The Quran says killing an innocent amounts to killing the whole of humanity. Nuclear weapon does not make any distinction between innocents and non-innocents, between humans and animals, and all generations will be affected. Therefore, we do not believe in nuclear arms. But nuclear energy means electricity. How can you tell a country to stop generating electricity? Of course, nuclear technology has many other uses, like medicine. We are not seeking to develop nuclear arms. They are not entitled to say Iran should not have enriched uranium. A nuclear-armed nation, which is still expanding its nuclear arsenal, is banning us from nuclear technology. Why? Who are you to order us to have or not to have?
In the absence of other options, Iran will have to depend on asymmetric warfare to be won with its domestically produced missiles, munitions, and smaller weapons systems. Although it has developed some stealth munitions which cannot be disclosed. With even the faint shadow of goodwill, the JCPOA out of the picture now, Iran definitely can't call off its military industry.
What the US politicians are not paying attention to or refuse to understand is that they have yet to know Iranian people who administered an 8-year war with empty hands. In that war, The US and the rest of the world were on the Iraqi front and Iran was alone. The Americans and the Allies acknowledged at the end of the day that they were incapable of defeating Iran. Therefore, the US would no longer do any trial and error.
Going by CRS numbers, between 2008 and 2015, the 6 GCC states ordered 181 times more than Iran and received massive transfers of modern aircraft and precision strike munitions and built up major surface-to-air and missile defenses. That is to say, they ordered a total of over $160 billion worth of military equipment, in contrast to Iran's $900 million. And that is excluding the Saudi-US arms deal of 2017, whereby the two countries signed a series of letters of intent for the Saudi Arabians to buy arms from the US, totaling $110 billion immediately and $350 billion over 10 years.
یکی از سیاست‌های استعمار از گذشته دور
One policy long sought by colonialist powers has been that any nation with oil or natural deposits would become dependent on that specific commodity. One policy has been to keep them from generating any wealth. To that end, they should become estranged to the culture of labor. This has been one of propagandistic policies of colonialist powers. A second policy has been to keep oil-rich nations from spending their oil money on development and scientific progress. The idea has been to prevent them from consuming their own products, so that they would spend money on Western products.
In fact, that arms deal appears to have stemmed from America's scaremongering in the region and presenting Iran as a scarecrow to its neighbors. Might one wonder why Iran felt threatened even with the JCPOA in place? And there's US strategy in action, cornering Iran and expecting it to cow down. In international relations, nothing's that simple. But to simplify to a matter of I say, he says, it still wouldn't be easy to blame Iran for the US pullout from the JCPOA, because Trump's USA has made a habit of pulling out of international deals. And it has even pulled out of or reduced its funding for 3 UN agencies only on grounds that they're biased against Israel. For their alleged anti-Israel bias, it was UNESCO, UNHRC, and UNRWA that the US targeted in 2017 and 2018. The acronyms respectively stand for the UN's Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization, its Human Rights Council, and Relief and Works Agency. While the UNRWA is meant to help refugees across the world, a substantial part of its work comprised aiding Palestinian refugees. How aiding them is bias against Israel is hard to figure out. Oh yes, here it is. They are refugees because they were cast out of their land by Israel. Later, in December 2019, the US blocked the appointment of judges to the World Trade Organization, WTO. Without those judges, the trade regulator would become meaningless. Donald Trump's latest stunt, however, came end May 2020 when he announced the termination of America's relationship with the World Health Organization, WHO. What is an ideal world in the eyes of the USA? Because since President Trump's time, not only has his country been pulling out of international contracts, it's even pulling out of international organizations.
اون چیزی که مسلمه خروج آمریکایی‌ها از این سازمان‌ها
What is clear is that the US withdrawal from international bodies is not so serious. They cannot flout every law after quitting. They are using it just as an instrument of threat. Unpredictable events aside, the US would continue to show such behavior up to 2030, will even trigger wars in some areas in the world, move its terrain of rivalry with China to sensitive regions from the South China Sea to the Persian Gulf and the Malacca Strait and Gibraltar. These areas are likely to become battlefields for world powers. These are all predictable. Therefore, the US behavior is normal as the world is evolving, and in such an evolution, the US is being harmed the most. The US will continue to behave like this up to 2030 in a bid to challenge its rivals and push them aside.
Anyhow, our story here is not so much a matter of right and wrong than a matter of workability. To go back a notch, the US and Israel and southern Arab allies' concern about a nuclear-armed Iran, if sincere, has only pushed Iran further towards military development. Going by my own experience, today argument in Parliament was more heated than usual. I wouldn't want to leave just yet, but it's time to say bye. So thanks for watching from me and the whole team. Don't forget to watch at the same times next week and each week after, and leave your comments and topic requests. Bye for now.